Hello and welcome to Kudomusicology to 2023. I know we had a stream last week, but the year is still young. So welcome. I'm glad to be back at rereading sound play, which is such a treat to come back to, and I think required reading. It's just so beautifully put together, and I recommend it. So I'm glad we're all on this journey, getting our rigor on at the beginning of the new year. I'm your host, Musicologess. This is Kudomusicology, a Ludomusicology Literature review, and we are continuing our first of our monograph series with William Cheng's sound play, video games, and the musical imagination. We left off last week kind of in the middle of chapter 2. Which is focusing on Final Fantasy VI, particularly the simulations of voices in Final Fantasy VI through the opera sequence, and there's some mention of Kefka's laugh as well. And then we will move on to Chapter 3, which is going to be about Silent Hill from 1999, the PlayStation original. So as we get into the swing of things here, get started, I would just like to sort of remind us of a couple things that'll come up in these chapters. I don't know that they are particularly graphic or troubling, but there is mention of both self-harm and kind of torture and inflicted harm in these chapters. So just be aware. I don't think we won't watch the Final Fantasy sequence. We will talk about it though, as we did when we covered Ryan Thompson's chapter on the opera, which I think is a nice kind of spiritual successor to this chapter. It draws on a lot of similar ideas and then kind of fleshes them out. And then Silent Hill, of course, is a survival horror game, so, you know, those things might not be your jam. We will watch the opening cutscene, well, not cutscene, but the opening bit of the game a little bit. Other than that, we'll mostly be sort of talking about the soundscape as a whole. So just quick notes on that, and I know folks are getting in, so before we launch too heavily, just toss out there again. I'd love to hear folks' New Year's resolutions, if you make them. I know that Julianne and I were talking last week about saying no to more things is a great one. Kind of protecting our own time as much as possible, although I feel like I'm already behind at the beginning of the year because of all the sickness right at Christmas, and I'm still like in the tail end of it, which is really annoying. I just want my airway back. It wasn't even COVID, you know? Prioritizing sleep is a great one. Oh, I love that. Yeah, I need to like not stay up so late so I can play more games. Yeah, I'd love to prioritize play. I think that's good. I'm doing more crafting. I'm cooking through a cookbook. That's fun. One of my cookbooks, which I was saying I should do some posts about my food adventures, because the cookbook that I am working my way through is from my favorite restaurant that I ate in when I was in London in 2018, which is Dishoom. It is an Indian restaurant. And I bought the cookbook, and I was making a bunch of stuff kind of the end of last year, and every single recipe was a winner with the whole family. Everybody loves them, including my 2-year-old. And so I was like, I'm going to cook through all of it. And I'm doing really well so far. So I made really good chicken ruby the other night, which is a repeat of something I'd already made. But I think over the weekend I'm going to do Paldari kofta, which sound fascinating. They're like kind of like vegetable dumplings mashed into goodness. So I'm very excited about those. But yeah. I'd love to hear about resolutions and all that. And just, give a shout out to us being a couple weeks away from the North American Conference on Video Game Music. Woo! NACFGM, as we so lovingly call it. So if you are hoping to attend, the info for it is here. There's vgmconference.weebly.com. We should get our own domain soon. We've been working on kind of like setting aside some money to do some branding and like have a little more polish in it all. Yes, I don't know much about the Ludo Study Group conference, Stefan. So if you could like link info so that I don't miss it, because I don't. Julianne mentioned it on stream last night, and I sort of remembered like months ago. Oh yeah, they're doing that thing in January, but like I didn't remember the time. Yes. So give us more info on the Ludo Study Group conference because I know we want to go to that. So, yes, my stream graphics are by George Reed. So if you're looking for artists, the chiptune as well was by George. So George does phenomenal chiptune and phenomenal graphics and pixel art. So George is a wonderful person to commission. I highly recommend. George is also just a dear friend, so it's been really exciting to get pieces of this. Good to see you. Hello, Trolley Beth. It's good to see you. Welcome. Thank you for the first time chat. Yeah. So I'd love to hear more about the Ludo Study Group. So please, those that are in the know, feel free to spread that information here. I'll also try to share stuff as I see it on Twitter and elsewhere. But yeah, North American Conference on Video Game Music is February 4th to 5th, 2023. Neil Lerner is our keynote speaker this year, and I'm so excited because Neil was on my dissertation committee and is going to be talking about kind of the at least preliminary conclusions of several years of research on pinball. So we've been seeing bits and pieces of it for years now, but I know I don't know if it's going to be a book or some kind of long form project, but we're going to hear all about pinball, and I just love that Neil is doing the work on the very earliest stuff, and that's an area I'd like to get a little back to myself in some of the really early things pre NES world. So it's going to be at Stetson University, hosted by Peter Smucker. February 4th and 5th, which is over a weekend, but there is an option to attend virtually, hybrid. And a lot of the various talks will be pre-recorded, and so they should be played back to the stream, in pretty good quality. A few of us will, of course, be there in person. If y'all are going to be there in person, make sure to let us know, and we can organize hanging out, going to dinner. There is no official conference dinner, so it's going to be kind of on us to hang out. Awesome. Okay, so the January 28th, all day Americas time-wise. We don't have too much more in publishable form yet, but that's the gist. Okay, great. Is it going to be, I'm guessing, stream, Zoom, is it Twitch? Is it a Zoom? What do they call those? Not conference, but thing where you broadcast. I don't have enough coffee yet. But yeah, I'm excited for that. And like I said, North American Conference on Video Game Music coming up. Yeah, hopefully once we have more info, we'll all spam y'all with trying to go to that. And that will be really exciting to gather virtually. I'm going to do I was joking last night on stream about getting a selfie stick. So I can really live up the idea of live vlogging NACFAGM and have people with us, not necessarily for the papers because you can attend hybrid, but when we're just hanging out. We'll see how that goes. It'll all depend on the signal we get down there and everything, but Discord, I love that. Discord's a great place to do that kind of thing, so that'll be a nice community space to build. Yeah, lots of great papers coming up at NACFAGM here. I'm actually giving one on Dragon's Lair, which is a chapter from my book that's coming out in April. Woo! Exciting. So that's actually why I put that one in, to kind of be hey, look, I'll have a coupon code or something for anybody who wants to pre-order. We're getting our proofs any day now, so we were supposed to get them on the 10th, and then I think they said the 17th, so next week. So very exciting. All right, enough dawdling. Let's jump back into Soundplay, Chapter 2. And so this is on the Final Fantasy VI opera, and where we left off, well, actually, it's in the same PowerPoint, so just to kind of walk back through it really quickly. So this is all about Final Fantasy VI and the inability to have full voice acting or recorded singing, and the ways in which the synthesized sound is gesturing at vocality, and just how powerful the 2 moments of Kafka's laugh and Celeste's singing in the opera. There's something about those 2 moments in particular that really stand out to people, kind of in the reception history. I mean, the opera in general, of course, has that quality to it as well, but that these moments are things that have stuck with us. Ooh, speaking of, good old Kafka. And just how, despite the limitations, there's this, incredible ability to signify and to carry a lot of meaning. And so it sort of signifies beyond its means, and digging into what that means. Yeah, the jump scare's coming in early. We're not even to Silent Hill yet. So all about like, how do we make these sounds say something? And one of the ways is to make sounds approximate vocal expression. So we talked a bit about the structure of the opera itself, which a lot of us know pretty well, that whole sequence, how we get into it, sort of the genres that the music implies, not just in the famous aria, but in like the overture and the waltz and the duel and the grand finale and all that. And then we had some transcription videos to get into that a little bit from back when we did our replay of the Pixel remaster play. We were comparing against the originals to see what they did with it. We're going to do that here a little bit, even though it's not in this chapter because this is from 2014. But I think it is an interesting thing to throw into the mix here in terms of like our little book club. Speaking of, let me share that link. So we have our kind of like book club list of questions, so we can build up some discussion points, some things we want to get into when we have William Cheng with us early February. So yeah, that's the plan. So we have a little bit, like each chapter kind of has its own. I should make a little thing for chapter 3. Chapter 3 on Silent Hill. There we go. So yeah, as we have any questions on these things, we can just kind of feel free to add them in yourself, or put them in the chat, and we can get them added in, just so we don't forget them along the way, because it's going to be, several weeks of this before we get to the final discussion. So we want to make sure we're not just sitting there not sure what we want to talk about. So yeah, things as they come up. Okay, so we have a whole description of the opera. We watched the aria itself. And we pick up on the YouTube recordings of the Final Fantasy VI aria, just uploads of the original, but also, different covers and versions by fans that were made available, and kind of talking about like making a retrospective community around the passion people had for this particular moment, this particular track. And looking at the comments on these videos and the nostalgia that, often invoking expressions of emotion, like crying or becoming choked up. And particularly interesting when there were self-identified men who were saying like, oh, you're not a man until you cry at this, or like, I'm glad I'm not the only one, and things like that, and finding kind of like a homosocial camaraderie in that moment of like, yeah, this part made me cry and I'm a guy, that kind of a thing. So to flip over, there's also interesting responses to uploads of Kafka's Laugh, often on loop because it's so short. It's just, the other most obvious example of approximating vocality in the game. Modern games, of course, don't need to approximate anymore. We just have a creepy laugh, and we can have versions of music from these games translated into live performances, with concerts like Distant Worlds, and then of course what they did with the Pixel remaster, where they were able to record the opera in a bunch of different languages. And so it wasn't just Oz, it was fully lyric, their lyrics were written, there were lyrics in the original too, of course, but we have settings in the different languages, and different singers for most of them, although there were a couple that doubled up and did more than one of the languages. As we saw when we streamed it on the Stream Team Thursday night channel, we had Andy Rosen on as our resident opera expert. And I say that with all deference because Annie has sung at the Met. So we really wanted Annie's take on the opera sequence. And so we sort of thought we would just watch the English one. We ended up watching all of them that night on the stream and just kind of like letting Annie go off. And it was awesome. we were just like, please keep talking about just like all the technique and some of the choices made. So really, really interesting moment. And we were all looking forward to seeing what happened with that. So we don't really need to approximate these sounds anymore, but they've persisted anyway. So Will Cheng writes, in terms of sound quality and material complexity, the soundtracks of modern games easily hold their own against or outright resemble classical symphonies, film scores, electronica, and other contemporary music. That said, many players nowadays retain a soft spot for games and game music from decades past. That's me, right? That's a lot of us. The nostalgic sound of earlier games represent hours spent in those worlds, so we have a connection to those particular versions, even as we also might like an OC remix or a modern symphony interpretation of it. It kind of, none of that works without our connection to the original on its own terms. So this fandom manifests online in so many ways, sharing videos of gameplay, the soundtracks, but also in curating and distributing sheet music transcriptions. Very easy to find even this entire score transcribed. MIDI libraries, rare album covers, and memorabilia. And that's not to mention, the actual fan covers, fan art, fan fiction, all these kind of new creations by fans that are trying to extend that world. So, with this in mind, it is clear that fans of the Final Fantasy VI aria and of retro game soundtracks more broadly are devoted to this music not despite, but rather largely because of its aesthetic constraints. Absolutely, right? And those of us that are like, it's about affordance, not limitation. It's about like what we're able to say using those timbres and that being powerful on its own. And part of the interest here is the idea that the input and output don't seem to match, that we get this powerful effect despite all these limitations, making the most out of something minimal. And this is, of course, why minimalism is so powerful, too. If you take like a Mozart symphony, something that wasn't designed for that sound, and you put it into notation software, or you synthesize it in some way. I'm thinking particularly of like the low quality samples in like a free notation software, and then you play it back, or you use an electronic sample. The result can sound really bad, right? Stripped down, hollow, blasphemous. And I love Cheng writes, straight up mediocre conversions, if devoid of skillful tweaking or chiptune stylization, might grate on a listener's ears and come across as imposters of beloved originals. But if something is kind of native to chiptune, if the chiptuned aria with its sample voice is the original, a lot of people say they prefer it to the live versions, and I'm kind of one of them. So, and this is always, baffled even my colleagues that are like, how can you prefer it? It's just like, it's cheesy with the but so many of us have found community and being really charmed by that. Interestingly, other than that vocal sample, the aria doesn't really stand out from the rest of the score melodically, harmonically, or timbrally. I mean, slightly timbrally. I'm also very particular about, I'm sure you are, 8-Bit Aria, but I'm very particular about live recreations. And I think some folks find amusement in seeing how I'm going to react to, drastic changes from the original. Although we did say with the Pixel remaster overall, we wish that they had swung for the fences a little more than they did. They were a little careful with like the soundtrack as a whole, kind of knowing that it's sacred to a lot of people. But it meant that some of the arrangements just fell flat. And there were places in Final Fantasy 4 and 5 Pixel remasters where we were like, whoa, they really went for it, especially 5, because I think they felt that one was less known and they could kind of play with it a little more. So I wish they had kind of just, failed spectacularly rather than playing it safe if they were going to go that route. Like, I'd rather have something be really, really like not what I wanted, but interesting in some way. That said, it's not like it's not skillful. And there were a lot of places where the Pixel remaster version was exactly what I would have pictured it sounding like. I remember Shadow's theme was like that. So there were a few places where you're like, yep, this is exactly it. So the aria without the vocal sound, the vocal sample, really doesn't, it just sounds like the rest of the underscore. And instead of that being a knock on the aria kind of not being operatic enough, it's sort of gesturing at the idea that the entire score for the game is an opera, in the use of leitmotif and the idea that the characters' themes are representing their inner voices, that it's kind of singing what's happening in their inner worlds. And this gesturing of the vocals is really important, though, and that's what gives it that special status as utterance. It's, the way it alludes to that. Yeah. So all this stuff about nostalgia for Celeste's voice in the end is to play along in a game of virtual longing. Virtual because it's a longing for something that could never really be, for a voice that never even existed in the way it would have us believe. Oh, that's so good. Definitely put that in the book club document, Andrew. That's a great question. The nostalgic moments, are they for the music or for like, are they is it nostalgic because I remember me playing this for the first time and like sitting down and like just the way that I was enchanted by this whole world. And me particularly, I had a little Walkman and I would like record, I would stand like not playing the game, just like having them stand in a location so I could record the audio without any battle or sound effects interrupting it. And then I like built my own soundtrack tape out of this game. And I did this with other games, but this was one of the early ones I did that with. So it's like, what am I nostalgic for? What am I nostalgic for exactly? Am I nostalgic for like who I was in that moment? Am I nostalgic for the gameplay? Am I nostalgic for the world? Obviously there was a connection to the music itself, but it's a piece. It's a piece of it. But yeah, nostalgia ends up being kind of a smaller part of this whole chapter. This sequence is also really interesting because, like, ludically, it's a respite from everything else, from the plot, but also from just the gameplay modes of exploration and battle, and that you're asked to kind of choose the correct line. So you have to memorize a short script, from the libretto, and then you have to kind of plug and play when you're asked to. But you're also able to, it's not so difficult to do that. You're only prompted at a few different points. And so you are able to kind of sit back and appreciate it, which is something that he brings up earlier in their chapter. Yeah, so yeah, exactly. That's a really good point about the FF7 remake, where the map theme was wrong, quote unquote wrong, because it wasn't working. It didn't have the same ludic function or narrative function that it did before. Yeah, they've done some interesting. I'm very interested to see where the rest of 7 remake goes. So this sequence is a break from everything else, insulated from the calamities of the outside land, as Cheng eloquently puts it. And that the singing itself is this resistance against the Empire and against Kafka, and asserting that even in a world gone mad, the show can go on. So it's also just I think it stands out because it is such a break in the action of a typical role-playing game. Of course, the opera itself is interrupted by the fight with Ultros, the impresario trying to kind of improvise around it and pretend, it's just all part of the show, right? And even once Setzer kidnaps Celeste, then we get the stay tuned, like almost like it's a serial like TV show or something, like come back for part 2, find out what happens. Like we assume that never happened, or maybe they built a new show and cast Maria and had folks come back to like somehow write that back into the plot. I don't know. Of course, the broader conceit here is full of these unbelievable coincidences. You need Setzer's airship. He just so happens to be obsessed with Maria, the opera singer. Celeste just so happens to look exactly like her, and apparently fit her costumes and everything, like same size and everything, because she gets dressed up to be in the opera. And then, according to Cheng, luckily for the heroes, she happens to sing like an angel. This is my question. It's kind of like, does she though? we've talked about the one octave range and sort of the way in which the melody is constructed. It's strophic. There's no ornamentation. Like, she's in tune, but like I think the game is careful to paint her as an amateur. And this is where the Pixel remakes get interesting, because the Pixel remakes, Pixel remasters first of all, they do this disgusting like 3D castle. I hate it. I think I said that when we played it. Like, why is it just I get that they wanted this sequence to stand out, but like, ugh. It ruined, and as Ryan pointed out, his chapter discusses that the level geometry of the castle mirrors the cliff where she's eventually going to try to give in to despair, right? And that's when you see it in 2D, that connection is much clearer. We don't get that anymore with this because they don't 3D the cliff; they only 3D the castle. So we kind of lose some of that resonance, which happens both graphically and musically, because of course the music that plays at that moment is Celeste's stylization of this aria theme into her own theme. So it kind of wrecks that a little bit. But as we noticed, the English was the first one we listened to when we played through it, and a lot of folks were just like, it works. It's exactly what they said they were going to go for. The whole point is that she's not a professional singer. But I think that what came out for a lot of us, yeah, exactly, she should not sound like an opera singer since she's not. But a lot of the conversation between the community as we were playing through this was, yeah, but I kind of wanted to suspend the disbelief. Like, you were already kind of like, she's already filling in. She's got this full orchestra under her that she's trying to sing over. And like, you just kind of want to believe it's like her moment of triumph. And so it's kind of like, would I have minded like an actual like professional opera voice here? No, not at all. And some of the other languages actually had approaching more of an operatic style in the voice. So it just kind of depends which one you listen to. But the English one makes it really apparent. It's not like it's not amateur in like an incompetent way. It's actually more of a pop voice, was sort of how we described it. Let's listen to it real quick. I can stop blabbing. Etc. Yeah, I know it's a little quiet. That's just the video I happened to grab, and because I don't have like a save in the Pixel. I actually don't own the Pixel remasters yet. Whoops. So I didn't have my own save. So yeah, it was jacked all the way, but kind of a quiet recording. Apologies, but you get the idea. Yeah, there is a physical release that I saw Ryan post about recently. So I was like, maybe that's how we'll do it, because my husband and I like getting a physical release of big games when we can, even like indie titles. We do like, we'll look for when Limited Run Games puts out, Celeste or some of these, Cuphead or, like any of those kinds of games. We try to buy like a physical release when we can. Oh, it's sold out already. Well, there you go. I guess I won't be playing it for a bit. But we ended up seeing, we played all of this one, but we also ended up seeing a good amount of some of the other ones. So at the moment, I don't feel like I need to play them. Sometimes in streaming, it's nice because you don't have to play. You can watch Ryan play or whatever. Ooh, Santa brought Cuphead. That's fun. That's a great game. Lisa's chapter in our forthcoming book is all about Cuphead. It's really good. It's based on work that she gave at NACFM a few years ago, and I had been like really excited for her to finally publish. So I'm really glad she put it in the book. Anyway, so I think the Pixel remaster is something that I definitely want to talk with William about when he is here, and just sort of, I'm curious how he thinks that these are kind of the new official versions, right? Official. And how does that complicate or complement the earlier arguments about this aria with regard to like nostalgia and vocality and like the aesthetics and all of that. So I think there's some interesting things to think about here with that. But the arguments made first here and then extended in Ryan Thompson's chapter in the Green Book, the RPG book. Final Fantasy VI as a whole resembles an operatic structure. And here, Cheng doesn't continue it in quite the same way. Ryan gets into like, an act structure and the relationships between leitmotifs, and like he digs into it a little bit more and extends out from here. But Cheng's merely saying not even just the plot, but just like the idea that there's nearly continuous music underscoring the adventure and just the sheer amount of music, and that there's leitmotifs, there's themes representing particular places, characters, and the recurrence of themes operates similarly to filmic and operatic leitmotifs, and recur at significant moments in the plots for these characters. And so then this is a way of sort of mapping this operatic idea out to the rest of the score, saying, the melodies themselves, like just the structure of the music, very clear, very singable. You can text them pretty easily. I usually think that those, let's just say I'm not convinced most of the time when I see covers where people have made up new words to things that weren't originally texted. I think it's easy to do, but it's also hard to do well. And so the melodies are very clear, very singable. They give that impression of being virtually sung, illusorily giving voice to characters who lack audible speech. So in an abstract sense, he's saying that the music is the sung voice of the characters themselves. So an example of the sequence is after the world ends. We know the famous sequence where we're trying to save Sid by fishing, and good to see you. We fail to save Sid by fishing, and or if you're me, you don't know about this until 5 years ago, when we started the stream and played this moment. I should like clip that, because I think everybody was like, wait, how did you not know? I was just too good at fishing as a kid. So I didn't know this whole sequence. So I never found out about it until I did it live in front of everyone. Celeste, as far as she knows, they're the only two people that survived the cataclysm, and she's alone on this island, doesn't know what else is out there, if anything is out there. And now she's lost Sid, who is like the only representation of family that she knows, and so she contemplates ending her life. And the sequence is scored to the same melody as the aria, but it is a different arrangement. It's not just the aria. So now it's becoming associated with Celeste as her theme. Like it's a way of reflecting back on a happier moment, a triumphant moment, a moment where, as Ryan says in his chapter, she's kind of escaping the trauma of her upbringing and the abuse that she's suffered in her youth. And it's a really powerful, transformative moment, musically and otherwise. And so this sequence carries the memory of the performance, but it also juxtaposes it against the present despair. And she does survive, of course. And then we hear Forever Rachel, which is really, really powerful, because it's kind of showing that like her connection to Locke, they're going to kind of both save each other in that sense through their relationship, because Locke is blaming himself for Rachel's death. And the fact that theme, it's not Locke's theme that comes up, it's Rachel's. When she Celeste survives, she sees homing pigeon bring Locke's bandana, and her connection to him is represented by like his former girlfriend's theme. It's kind of an interesting role reversal moment. But so the music is actually doing some really interesting semiotic lifting in this whole sequence. So I quoted this kind of at length because I like this. Even without overtly quoting diegetic performances, the melodies of the game's soundtrack can be heard as projections of inner voices, as externalizations of the songs that characters carry in their hearts. It takes only a slight leap of the imagination to apprehend the game's themes as music that is actively emanating from, rather than merely speaking for, corresponding characters in the game. As heroes and villains do battle across FF6's epic adventure, the continuous wash of lyric music gives rise to a virtual, almost but not quite, opera, a sub-vocalized spectacle that lies somewhere between the abstractly instrumental and the actually sung. Of course, Ryan will take that further. That, I think he basically starts from the premise that it isn't really almost but not quite opera, that it just kind of is opera. So, if we treat her singing voice in the opera sequence and the instrumental allusions to that voice later on in the suicide sequence, in the vague voicedness of other characters' musical themes as, quote, 3 modes of synthesized musical expression that could be construed as respectively once, twice, and 3 times removed from a real singing voice, now we're going to loop back to the real singing voice and end on the live versions. And most of these have been concert pieces. Most don't involve blocking, acting, sets, much, if any, choreography for the waltz part, props, or costumes. A lot of the performances, folks are just in concert dress. So maybe the person portraying Maria is in a dress, but mostly the men are in tuxedos. They're not dressed like the video game characters necessarily. One popular adaptation is by Shiro Hamaguchi, who turned it into a 12-minute version for 3 vocalists and classical orchestra, and this went on tour in 2004 on 6 Japanese cities with the Tour de Japon, music from Final Fantasy, with Taizo Takemoto conducting, mezzo-soprano Etsuyo Ota as Maria, tenor Tomoaki Watanabe as Draco, and bass Tetsuya Otagawa as Prince Ralse. And Hamaguchi's arrangement gets rid of the narrator, the chancellor, Ultros, and Setzer, kind of all of the external bits, the framing bits, and ends it instead with a duel between Ralse and Draco, where Ralse is wounded, and then the 3 sing a new ending. So it's pretty strange plot-wise to have Ralse joining in on the final moment, when he's supposed to be conceding defeat, like, okay, you two can be together, I give up, you've beaten me in the duel, and instead he joins in on the lyrics, our love come what may, will never age a day, I'll wait forevermore. It's kind of like Ralse isn't getting the hint that his part is done with, and Cheng describes him as a spurned opera buffa antagonist, and just like he's sort of awkwardly inserting himself into this trio. So from a plot standpoint, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but musically it does, because having everybody sing together in the grand finale is a big operatic convention. So here we're going to forfeit the realism of the plot to the spectacle of the music, and it allows the 3 of them to end on the 3 notes of a tonic chord, and so after they sing Forevermore, they all sing ah on the final chord from the 3 performers. And it's not like we never get this kind of open vowel cry in opera, and he lists a bunch of examples in these operas. Let me just pull that up really quick. So we have the Messengers, Ahi, Caso Acerbo, and Claudio Monteverdi's L'Orfeo, Dido's But Forget My Fate in Dido and Aeneas, and the Glut of Death Screams in late Romantic and Expressionist opera. So we do have moments where we have ahs. They're often melismatic, though. They're often a little bit more virtuosic. They're usually not this fixed chord with a very disciplined vibrato. So the other weird thing is it sort of feels tacked on after the lyric has concluded, so why not have the big chord on the more of Forevermore? Instead, we get this extra nonsense syllable, and so he thinks that's an allusion to the sound of the original. He writes, on the one hand, then, this collective explosion of voice is absurd, contrived, and mechanical. On the other hand, it serves as an apt throwback to the ah singing in the video game version of the opera, a pitch-perfect homage to how Celeste sang. So ton of different versions, including a prog rock version of the opera by the Black Mages. Of course, Uematsu is a founding member of the Black Mages. And so there's so many different versions of this, but You know, all of this is to say that we fell in love, and I say we because I'm one of them, with the opera on its own terms, not for what it could or would one day become, an orchestral or prog rock arrangement, a theme and a concerto movement, and so forth, but for what it already was. And what's more, it's not like we've abandoned this style of music or graphics. Whole games in this aesthetic are being created even though we don't need to, and we technically don't need to anymore. So it's really not just nostalgia at work, especially when some of the creators now weren't even born yet to experience this era firsthand. So there's more than just nostalgia, which is kind of the overarching point, and probably maybe the reason that Cheng doesn't hammer on the nostalgia too much, because I think he's arguing that yes, that's a piece of the effect here, but that the sounds themselves are inherently communicative and evocative and powerful. And that's an aesthetic that people continue to latch onto on its own terms, even if they don't have personal nostalgia for it. So this kind of leans into our next chapter a little bit. We often hear voices and sounds that aren't vocal. The wind can have kind of a vocal quality to it. Higher range of cello is often described as being the closest to the human voice, you know, that sort of thing. Even things like radio static. And we also see shapes in tea leaves and clouds. There's all those wonderful like little Instagram accounts and things about like seeing faces in, you know, an outlet, an electrical outlet, or in the shape of tree leaves, or, you know, something like that. And leaves and clouds, we're like constantly trying to like animate the world around us. So I love this quote here. Making something out of apparently nothing is a testament to the enterprising whims of the human imagination. At work here is a vague animism born of our desire for things to murmur to us, to let spill the secrets beneath their silent surfaces. Such impulses reveal us as hungrily hermeneutic in disposition, as interpretative beings craving company, conversation, and means of tuning into surroundings both real and virtual. For while our physical realities aren't filled with singing clocks and candelabras of the Disney variety, we do in the end live in an animated world of sorts, a world envoiced and enlivened by our own flights of fancy. Which brings us to Dead Ringers, Chapter 3. So this is all about Silent Hill. For the one from 1999, published by Konami for the Sony PlayStation. So we open with a description of the opening sequence, with a scripted death for Harry and the feeling of helplessness that it instantly conveys to the player to not be able to escape the monsters that kill him. We will watch this in just a moment. Of course, this game has been discussed by many, many people, and sort of the influences of Gothic literature, H.P. Lovecraft, Japanese no theater, Alfred Hitchcock films, and particularly J-horror, and its topical arsenal of demonic mothers, victimized daughters, vengeful spirits, and terrorizing technologies are all evident in this game. So here's a little bit of the intro. It's creepy. You know, warning, it's creepy. Yeah, this one's definitely a lot louder than the other one. the footsteps are so apparent over the kind of like weird cycling groaning of the drones. Those footsteps are quiet though.
Cheryl? Is that Cheryl?
Yikes.
Where are you going? Hey, wait! Stop!
And we can hear as we kind of get further into this, there's now that kind of higher pitched banging, I don't know, metallic sound. So we're adding elements to the soundscape as we get kind of deeper into the alleyway here. Okay. Creepy. The camera angle is out of control. Uh-oh. That's a signal, right? And of course the alleyway is narrowing too. And it's getting darker. Cool. Cool. And now we have this like air raid siren getting added in, so we're adding more and more layers the more constricted the alleyway gets. Broken wheelchair, yikes. But the wheel is just like turning and turning and turning. A bloody gurney, okay, great. More layers added. Now we get this like synthesized string creepiness here. String organ-y sound. It's getting bloodier. It's a lot of bones.
What is this? What's going on here?
It's like, oh, okay, I'll just go back the way I came, right? Oh, it's blocked off now. Cool. And then these pretty short-looking creatures are coming at us with knives. And this is scripted, so no matter what you do in this sequence, you die. I won't go too much further, but we do wake up. You're just like, okay, was that a dream? What just happened? The police officer is going to tell us, like, hey, creepy things have been happening. And then let me see if I can just get the...
Second, I'm just...
I'd tell you if I
where he
knew,
grabs the radio. Okay. Yeah, like, what's going on with that radio? Has that kind of like uncanny ringing sound. Okay, so that's everything we need. Ooh, creepy. Okay, so basic plot, for those that don't know it, it revolves around Dahlia Gillespie, who is torturing her daughter Alessa to try to revive the god of occult, and she's kind of caught in this like living nightmare. And Silent Hill itself, the town, is being transformed into visions of this kind of demonic underworld. So Cheng writes, the flesh wounds of Lessa are etched into these hellish environments while her mental anguish reverberates through a soundscape that pulses with groaning metal, squeaking wheels, air raid sirens, howling monsters, and other noises of nature and technology gone awry. The jumbled sounds, darkness, and fog in the world signal a collective disavowal of aesthetic legibility, a disavowal born of trauma so unspeakable that its symptoms and aftershocks lie beyond all conventional representation. Silent Hill compels its player to emphasize with Alessa's suffering via gameplay that stresses vulnerability instead of blazing guns and superhuman feats. So Harry here is a normal dude. Although the very first bloody character that he saw in that, as he's like walking into the alleyway, I'm like, wow, he seems to like not have the kind of reaction I might have if I stumbled upon that. But that's probably because the player's controlling you to keep going. But horror games here work by destabilizing a player's sense of control. I mean, it's one of the ways that they work, right? Just like that shower sequence in Hitchcock's Psycho from 1960, Silent Hill is showing us right at the, well, not, that's in the middle, but showing here at the beginning that all bets are off. It's a breach of the contract between gamer and game where we normally can influence the outcome. So we might be fearful, but also angry, frustrated at like that you can't do anything. And then when you wake up, you're like, oh, okay, I didn't screw up there. That was scripted. I was supposed to lose that. So it's pretty grotesque. The music itself and the soundscape manifests as a sentient antagonist. So this is kind of reminding me a little bit of some of Andrew's work on horror. the idea of like the way that the soundscape itself is contributing to the effect. So it's seething and convulsing as it plays mind games with the player. This is our walkthrough statement. The present chapter contemplates the ludic, perceptual, and hermeneutic anxieties provoked by this game's uncanny sounds, by underscoring the ways in which industrial noises in Silent Hill haunt various borders between diegetic and non-diegetic, real and virtual, lingering in ephemeral, organic and mechanical, surface and subdermal, instructive and manipulative. I explore how the game's audio works to unsettle a player's mental and bodily control. Through comparisons of discourses on noise and monsters, I frame the sounds in this game world as living monsters in their own right, abject, liminal, and always potentially trespassing on players' own spaces. Underpinning these considerations are broader investigations into the economies of fear, the frightening efficiency with which the minimal sounds and overall reductive aesthetics of horror media can evoke maximal terror. So it's a nice extension out of the previous chapter, and that we were sort of talking about maximal affect from minimal techniques. And so we're getting kind of like a flip of that now. It's the same idea, but now extended into horror. So the town, even right at the beginning here, he's like, oh, it's like too quiet here, right? It's creepily quiet. So lots of spaces that are silent, or at least implied to be silent, even though there's like drones and other things happening. But there's also a lot of noises that Akira Yamaoka put into the soundscape. So it's not just music. It's a whole combination of different effects, including microtonal slides, dissonant stacked chords, timbral distortions, juxtapositions of extreme registers, rapid vibrato, drones, prolonged decays, and ghostly echoes. And so as I was commenting, and the opening sequence is increasing in density as it goes on, and the passage is narrowing, and you lose the ability to escape. So Cheng writes, a sense of claustrophobia is compounded by this simultaneous compression of space and expansion of noise. Accumulating sound waves overfill the slender alleyway, bracing against its walls and virtually bursting at the seams of our screen. Because it's like an auditory crowding, right? It's not by becoming like sparse and open that we get a sense. We have to get the compression through crowding our perception of the sound. So these scraps of sound are sewn together into a creepy patchwork, a little Frankenstein's monster, acoustically, with noises reaching fever pitch whenever the town transforms into the nightmarish otherworld. So here we are drawing on timbres that were also used in industrial and some punk musics, and the idea that using non-musical sound in music is an anti-aesthetic in its own. fitting for a game that is very, at times, anti-ludic. So we are not just mixing notions of diegetic or non-diegetic sound. The sort of blurring or inability to distinguish between the two is important to the effect, but we're also blurring real world with diegetic sound, the notion of crossing over boundaries into the real world. So sounds could be mistaken for being in our home, as opposed to in the game, or in the game as opposed to being in our home. Things like creaking floorboards, hums of machinery, and like pipes, metallic sounds. So we reference the call is coming from inside the house, the classic invocation. So this is from When a Stranger Calls, 1979, where, you trace the call. Oh, the call, it's coming from inside the house. And so you know that the killer is in the house with the girl. The sounds are in the home with us. And so a really great example of this is that when Cheng was taking notes on the soundscape, he wrote down like, oh, there's a D flat drone 2 octaves below middle C. But then after he turned the game off, he still heard it. And so he then realized it was his refrigerator and said it was a noise I had long learned to tune out while going about daily business in my apartment. And yet when mashed against the game's audio, it returned with sudden vengeance. In this instance, the game's patchwork soundscape functioned as a noise magnet, an acoustic katamari that drew the hum of my fridge into the orbit of its own ghastly formation. Ugh, so good, right? Or sometimes just the way that something is mixed, like a door slamming in a horror movie, you might jump and like feel like it's your own door. So there's that boundary crossing. And so he describes sounds can break out of the game just like Sadako in the ring coming out of the TV, right? But also the sounds in the home can seemingly enter the game and get absorbed. And so a lot of horror games play with the seemingly mundane materials, and that ends up being pretty scary because of the doubt that they inflict. You can tell yourself monsters aren't real, but if a game glitches or claims it deleted your save or it fakes a blue screen of death, you can't totally insulate yourself from that. Because while most people would say there's no such thing as zombies, there is such a thing as hardware failure. So a lot of these games do this, especially survival horror. But since the noises in there are dead ringers, oh, hey, that's the name of the chapter. The noises in there are dead ringers for the everyday noises out here. We are working with scrambled sensoria. Regardless of how well we might strive to perceive these noises as being safely contained in the game, some uncertainty can continue to nibble at the fringes of our consciousness. Anytime we succumb to such tricks, we might feel as if we are no longer involved in sound play, to wit, in a safe ludic encounter. So, if you ask composer Akira Yamaoka how the sound in music strikes fear in players, he has said in interviews irregularity and unpredictability, and that humans thrive on routine and things like that. Cheng is actually saying like, yeah, that's true, but repetition is a huge part of the effect of this game too. There's very obvious looping and cycling that happens with even just in that opening sequence with the way the drones were cycling. So it gives a sense of like we're lost in a labyrinth. We can't get out. We're endlessly cycling through. And we can't mute the audio because we also need it for clues to the game state. Even if some games play with that and, we have the unreliable narrator or whatever where they'll fake you out too. And so you learn to kind of, you need them, but you also can't always trust them. That's common. But you also, muting it makes it very difficult, if not impossible, to play a lot of these games. But also the repetition itself is part of the aesthetic. So this gesturing at musical repetition, but also minimalism, is common in horror as a sign of trauma, mindlessness, or psychological unrest. So noise becomes a semiotic vacuum, an auditory Rorschach test, signifying at once everything and nothing. So then here we go a bit into other folks describing noise. Toth 2009 describes it as a refusal of representation, a refusal of identity. Kelly 2009 describes it as out of control, situated within excess. And Kim Cascone describes an aesthetics of failure associated with noise. Oh, I wish I could shake the last of this. Last of this cold here. Anyway, monsters are often treated as exaggerations or externalizations of the darkest parts of human nature, but they also feature notions of excess, but also both a lack of meaning and too much meaning. They're just like very interpretable, you know, and so we actually interpret noise and monstrosity in similar ways, and so it's not that far of a stretch to interpret noise as monstrous. And one thing that's unsettling and unpredictable about the game world of Silent Hill is that it's a projection of a traumatized girl, so any incongruous or bizarre elements can stem from that unreliable narrator. Lots of horror films trade on economies of fear. So simplified aesthetics, seemingly low budget or DIY, and one example is the Blair Witch Project, you know, framed as if it was found footage from someone's camcorder, right, of teens in the woods and the creepiness therein. And he sort of describes that there's an interesting acceptance of that, things that we would not accept in other genres because we would write them off as being amateurish and incompetent. But we sort of accept the sort of failures in the aesthetic of a horror film because we I don't know, find it more realistic or something like that. So he says reductive art gets condemned when it is assumed to be the result of incompetence, but commended if it can somehow be confirmed as the product of intentional painstaking stylization. So we get a visceral effect of horror, linking to Linda Williams's work on body genres, which is horror is a body genre, but she also talks about pornography and melodrama, and basically good work, go read it. But also all three of those genres are about compelling and implicating the body of the audience, and they're trading on causing sensation in you know, through the ways that they're evoking bodies in the genres themselves. Comparison. Then we move to a comparison of auditory stingers to jump scares, which are sometimes seen as a cheap way to induce horror because it's just like playing on your brain's natural mechanisms, right? That you're responding to a stimulus, and especially a sudden one, your brain goes into like overdrive to immediately like assess what it is, where it's coming from, do I need to act? And the way that's releasing chemicals in your body to cause readiness for fight or flight. And so these are seen as kind of cheap because they're just engaging those mechanisms in such an immediate way, as opposed to, I don't know, building it up in an intellectual way, like a suspense thriller would do. I don't know. We don't get quite into that, but there's an often, you know, people describe these scares as cheap, which is interesting, as opposed to the expensive ones. So after this intro cutscene, as we saw a little bit into this, Harry wakes up in a diner. He's given a gun by the police officer saying, like, there's weird stuff going on. Here's a gun, because that's normal. And then he finds that radio spewing static. And then we learn why it's doing that, and that the pocket radio is basically a monster detector, and so the strength of the static indicates proximity, but it gives you no sense of where the creatures are and where they could be coming from. So you just get this sense that they're kind of like all around you, or they're potentially all around you, which is terrifying. But as you go on, the way that you are using that radio ends up making it seem almost like the static is controlling the player. It's leading us. It's controlling us in that it's shaping our reactions to it. It's kind of not the other way around anymore. So just like the sounds are coming out into the real world and sounds are getting magnetized and sucked into the game, it's also like kind of happening with us through the sound. And this hyper compressed radio static signal is also an economy of fear itself. White noise is the noisiest of all noises, right? What's the official definition? That it contains all frequencies in equal measure? White noise. Because I know there's like the different colors of noise, right? Many frequencies with equal intensities. Yeah, as opposed to, there's like a bunch of different ones, isn't there? Like there's pink noise. I know like if you get those relaxation apps, that a lot of them will have the other colors of noise, and that it all has to do with like the way that the frequencies are distributed. So yes, white noise is a heterogeneous mixture of sound waves extending over a wide frequency range, constant background noise, especially one that drowns out other sounds. And then pink noise is a mixture of sound waves with an intensity that diminishes proportionally with frequency to yield approximately equal energy per octave. So if you pull up in those kinds of apps, like different styles of noise, a lot of folks like that it kind of helps tune things out, and so they use it for like meditative or sleep purposes. They sell noise machines for babies that are basically fans that create noise that prevent other noises from being distracting and make it easier to fall asleep. But in those apps, like, white noise is usually not the most popular for relaxation. It's actually busy in a way that can be like too activating to the person. Some people I think like it, but some of the other colors of noise are popular because they seem to be like a more soothing hush than white noise itself. But yeah, so this is kind of the noisiest of noise, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Classic. Devoid of aesthetic intervention. But its twist, the noise in Silent Hill is not actually white noise. It's usually described as such, and he actually, earlier in the chapter, Cheng intentionally describes it as white noise, just to kind of get across what it is, but then kind of drops this twist in a fun way. The reality is that the sound is technically not pure white noise. It's a stylized representation of it. The static of Harry's radio consists of a high ringing tone pitched at about 700 hertz, juxtaposed against looping samples of crackling sounds in a lower register. What's notable is how designers went this extra mile to create an aestheticized approximation of white noise, when they could have just resorted to blasting actual static. So why not just use white noise? That would be a lot easier, right? Like, why take the time to mess with it and try to turn it into something it's not? There's a theory here. This could be to be kinder to our ears, knowing that it was going to play a lot in the game. So it's possible it was about kind of avoiding the grating audio fatigue of true white noise if it was going to come up over and over and over and over and over again. But also it creates sort of an uncanny valley in itself, and that it's designed to be like white noise, but it isn't quite. And so the things that are in that sort of uncanny valley sonically are disturbing. So there's that idea too, that maybe the manipulation and the intentional design helps shape it into something that's actually scarier than the real thing, or maybe even a better representation of the real, kind of like hyper real, right? As like we've seen in film, we have sound effects that are not at all the natural sound. The superhero punch, right? You punch somebody, it tends to sound like a dull slap or a thud. There's not really all of that extra like in it. And Foley artists will tell you, oh yeah, we mixed in like walnuts getting cracked open, or like gunshots, or like these other things that are supposed to imply the sort of force, because you're not receiving or giving the punch. And so like the sound is doing extra work. It's like, it's not just cataloging what happened. In reality, it's conveying how it feels. So there's a sense that that's happening here too. So, with efficient scare tactics that wrangle us into submission, survival horror games in particular limit our agencies and thwart motivations for transgressive play. The game is not open world, at least not the 1999 one. It's pretty linear, and you really don't have a lot of choice or agency. And in an open world, like, you have a lot of choice, a lot of agency. You can just wander around and like not move the plot forward and kind of explore. And a game like this kind of needs to box you in to maintain that affective fear. If you're just wandering around appreciating the buildings, you have that moment of respite from the plot. So we kind of need it to be linear, boxed in, claustrophobic. And so the only real transgression is to stand there at his car and not wander down that alley in the first place. Okay, great, but then you're not playing the game anymore. So assertions of agent, like, yes, you can have these kind of like transgressive forms of play, but assertions of agency via ludic abstinence are not likely to come across as imaginative or impressive as such. No work and no play makes for a rather dull ploy. Like, yeah, you could just not play. But obviously, if you're trying to have a horror experience, then you have to kind of give yourself over to the rules of this world. And so we subject ourselves to horror media is to go forth and learn fear. And the game's going to keep teaching it to us in different forms. So a survival horror game can be a monster of a medium. It oversteps its inanimate status, breaks with convention, violates its ludic contracts, bombards us with noise, and teases us with illusions of real danger. Just as the spectatorship of horror films is said to be ruled by masochistic impulse, so there's an awful pleasure in stumbling through the haunted house of a horror game, surrendering to its manipulation and being transgressed against. Interpreting video games and their stimuli as uncannily living entities can shed light on interactivity, repetition, automation, and the intersections between our ludic, oral, and intellectual agencies. Imagination of things coming to life, of course, is the very stuff of video games, a medium that lets us displace authority onto virtual characters, to experience conflicting sensations of being in and out of control, and to inhabit spaces where nothing stays dead for long. Bum, bum, bum. Cool. So that's chapter 3. And we'll sit back on. That's a nice image. We'll sit back there. So that's chapter 3. Chapter 4, which we'll cover next week, is on Lord of the Rings Online. It's role-playing toward a virtual musical democracy. I'm going to try to actually scan because there's a lot of really good examples in this chapter. A lot of good images and stuff. Yeah, some good things. So we'll do that next week. As always, we'll keep coming up with questions. I don't know, did any questions come up for people on this one? I'll have to think through and see what I can come up with on this chapter. Horror and monstrosity and noise and body and aesthetic and all of these things. So yeah, I didn't write down any questions in advance. I will flesh out some of mine on Final Fantasy VI. Feel free to throw some thoughts in the document. It is editable, so that we can just kind of put things in there, which is nice. And yeah, we come back to transgression versus obedience. Which came up in chapter 1 when we talked about him standing still with the sunset and watching the sunrise. But here, the game just doesn't keep going in a satisfying way. We don't get a pretty piece of music that we're listening to. The game just doesn't go. You kind of have to decide that you're oh, I want to be scared, right? That's the contract you enter with the game. So even though it's breaking these ludic contracts, maybe that's a question. So horror as breaking ludic contracts with the player, but fulfilling horror genre contracts. We want to give ourselves over. We want to be scared and destabilized and come out surviving the ordeal. All that kind of thing. I don't know. I'll turn these into questions before we actually have our meeting. But yeah, this didn't take too long. That's actually a shorter chapter in the book overall. And I didn't pull as many examples because I wasn't doing this too far in advance. In fact, I did this morning, so hopefully I'll be a little more organized by next week. Because that one is a pretty quick read, I think. Let's see, how long is Lord of the Rings chapter? Is this one of the bigger ones? 112 to 137. That's not too bad. Chapter 5's pretty, and the epilogue will be a bigger chunk together. But we're getting through, and we'll have to decide. I will go back to doing articles and chapters for a bit, but we'll have to decide what we want the next book club book to be, the next monograph. I'm leaning toward Tim Summers' Understanding Video Game Music, because that just seems like essential reading, right? That's a possibility. But we could also do Unlimited Replays by Will Gibbons if we wanted. So those are both on the list. And of course, we could get even more stylized and do Tim Summers' Ocarina of Time monograph as well. So those are some thoughts. Oh, yeah, we could do the Newland. The Authenticity book, right? What's that one about? Yeah, I was talking about doing Summer of Summers for sure. I think that would be fun. Remind me what I think the Lind had something to do with like authenticity, if I remember, but I could be misremembering. Yes, I need to buy it before I would be able to do that one though. Just came into your library. Yeah. Yeah, I gotta get like coupon codes, you know? Build my library. It's the one, well, it's not the only issue, but it's one issue with being an adjunct who teaches remotely from a different state of my institution. I can't just go into our library. And they have limited budget. They don't necessarily own everything I need, but they've been pretty good about getting things I need if I'm going to assign it to students, and the students will go in and access it. But it often means that I have to have personal copies of anything I'm going to teach from, in addition to having the library have it. Because it can be kind of difficult to get. There's a good interlibrary loan system in Ohio, but it can be a whole thing just to like, okay, I have to have them send it to a particular library, which is a good half-hour drive, and then I got to go down and like park at the university, which is in the middle of downtown. It's like a whole thing. So it's like I have to plan, okay, how bad do I want this library book? Which, if I'm going to refer to, if it's a game book, there's a good reason for me to just own it. But yeah, I need to do that. Because I'm really interested in that book. Karen Cook had read it. I don't know if it was for a review or whatever, but maybe like a pre-press, like as a reviewer. She got to read an early version of it, and she mentioned it in the stream team chat a little bit. But yeah, I'm really interested in that one. Blurbed it, that was it. Yeah, no, because she had it before it just came out. She had it before it came out, so I knew it was something like internal to the press. That's pretty cool. Love a good blurb. Yeah, so we've got some new books coming out, but if anybody has any requests of... Oh, I know one of my first requests, since Kate's right here. Kate, we have to do your Stardew chapter. We got to pick a date, maybe after NACFAGM in like February or March if you have time. Because I already have the notes on it from when we almost did it last year, and then we had to move it. So I'm like ready to go whenever you are on that. And also, I love me some Stardew, so we'll have to do that one. But if anybody has any readings that you need an excuse to read, this is always a good excuse. Like, oh, I have to have it read by the stream so I can talk about it with people. Happy to do that. Otherwise, I'll just keep pulling from some of the edited collections that have come out. Yeah, same. My courses start next Wednesday, and I should check. As of yesterday, I didn't have contracts yet, even though they were submitted before Thanksgiving. Adjunct life. It's okay, because it's like, at least if I didn't have access to like Blackboard and email, then it would be a problem. But I'm able to do it. I just need to like sign on the dotted line. But it is like, I'd like to get that taken care of. And I'm just kind of in that holding pattern. Yeah, and you have more meetings, deadlines, things like that. Yay for contracts, right? I will say that none of that is a knock on Hartford. They've been great to me. I really like the people I have interacted with have all been really, really neat people, and very, very supportive, and making sure that I have what I need. Oops. I'm just like pulling things up on stream. Yes. Yeah, I don't know. Hopefully it'll all... But I'm teaching video games, which is fun because I have mostly done that as an 8-week summer course for non-majors where it's really compressed. And so I'm teaching it now as like an undergraduate, mostly majors, I think. I'll find out for sure on Wednesday when I meet them. But get to be a little more expansive. It's not like I'm adding a ton more content, but I'm able to like breathe a little bit and spread it out, especially with regard. Final projects are really hard to do. That's I think the hardest thing for me in the condensed summer classes. The content is always fine, but having them do any kind of project is always, it's like you got to start day one. And some people are like, I don't have any background. So you're like trying to give them background and get started so that they don't feel like they're behind, but it's 8 weeks. So there's only so much you can do. You have to like keep it really, really compressed. So in a 15 or 16 week semester, there's time that we can take a couple weeks and then like week 4, be like, okay, let's start thinking about projects and things like that. So yeah, I'm excited to hear, and I'm actually going to be getting back to a few of you have emailed me about coming to visit your classes, and now that I know when they meet, I can actually definitively give you answers now. So that's actually on my to-do list for today, along with baking like lemon poppy seed muffins, because I got poppy seeds from Penzi Spices that are blue. They're like deep, like blueberry blue, and I have to know if it will turn the batter green with the lemon yellow or if it will just be pretty blue seeds in the middle of the batter. So I'm gonna do that with the little one when she wakes up from her nap. And gonna get back to everybody on that, finish my course calendar for the game class, and then Blackboard is almost done for both those classes, so those are all like, everything's uploaded, so it should be ready to start. I'm excited to see. I'll post if they turn into Shrek muffins, but they're pretty cool. I'm excited. I'm trying to think if there's any other orders of business. Probably not. So yes, mentioned at the beginning of the stream graphics, beautiful, are by George Reed, and the little title sequence music is also just random projects that George hadn't done anything with and kind of donated to the cause. So because I had been talking about wanting to kind of build up some like little chiptune intros, so I was gifted Cloud Citadel and Droid Romance, and they are so good, and I love them both. George is the best, so if you need any of that kind of stuff, definitely shoot an email over to George Reed, because George is the best of us. So anyway, if anybody has any things you want to cover on stream, let me know. I'm going to be, slowly asking people and filling out the schedule so we can cover so much more material this year. And then, we'll probably do Summer of Summers, but we can also do some other monographs in there, depending on what folks want to do first. So we can do that. All right. Enjoy your Friday. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the end of break if you're still not started yet, or enjoy your first week of classes. And we'll see you next week, 2 p.m. for Chapter 4 of Sound Play. Thanks so much. Have a good day.